Hi, everybody. This is Annie Lareau, Artistic Director at Seattle Public Theater. And today I am interviewing Kathy Hsieh. She's a huge prominent theater artist here in town, and many of you have seen her on our stages several times. I'm going to read her bio, and then we're just going to have a little chat. So Kathy Hsieh is an award-winning actor, writer, and director who has performed on stages throughout the country on TV and film. Recent projects include a variety of Zoomlandia projects with Raisin in the Glass of Milk, The Brothers Paranormal with Porkfield Productions, and Romeo and Juliet with Seattle Shakespeare's Wooden O. She received a Gypsy Award for acting in Washer Dryer at Sis Productions and Pratawathi, plus Footlight and Gypsy Awards for acting in Chinglish by David Henry Wong at Arts West, and was nominated for an Ellie Award for the same role at Cats in Nevada City, California, both directed by me. She has also worked with Sound Theater, React, the Seattle Rep, Book It, Act, Intimon, Taproot, the 1448 Projects, Freehold, Living Voices, and more. She has received a special award of recognition by the Seattle Theater Writers Gypsy Awards for excellence in playwriting and the Gregory Award for sustained achievement. She is the Cultural Partnerships and Grant Manager for the Seattle Office in Arts and Culture, and one of the founders and co-executive producers of Sis Productions, an Asian American women-led theater company recognized by Audrey Magazine as a theater trailblazer. Welcome, Kathy.
Yay. Hi, Annie.
Hi. Thanks for joining us today. That's a mouthful. I'm tired just reading it. I know you do so much for this community. People at our stage might recognize you from the plays World of Extreme Happiness or Amadeus, or two iterations of Best Christmas Pageant Ever, if we're going to go back in time a little bit. So we are always thrilled to have you on our stage and to be part of Seattle Public Theater. So we just wanted to chat today, a little bit about how you got involved in theater. I know you are from here, and so yeah, what brought you to the world of theater?
Yeah, I grew up in Seattle, and a lot of people in different settings have heard different of my stories of growing up in Seattle and doing theater. So I thought I would share one that was just a little bit different that I haven't shared before. So what's interesting is going to church, which my aunt took my brother and I. We would often play acting games in between our Sunday school and the big church sermon getting done, and when my aunt was ready to take us home, and we would act out all of these different, mostly it was scary adventure movies. So it would be like our takeoff of the Poseidon Adventure into the Towering Inferno, into Bus or whatever, and we would just act it out with all the Sunday school kids. And I remember we had so much fun just basically imitating whatever we saw in film or whatever we saw on television. And that, I think, was when I first really enjoyed just play acting. Mm-hmm. I also did a lot of acting on the playground. When my brother and I were little, we were latchkey kids. Our parents were immigrants, and they worked until 5 or 6. So after school, my brother and I would spend a lot of time with our friends play acting out in the park next to our school. And I would play, we would play superheroes, was one of my funnest games. So we would make up superhero names. So mine was Jadica, and my alter ego was this, believe it or not, a big white male redneck Texan guy who sold used cars, and his name was Big Billy Bob. And because I wanted to, have my alter ego be someone that would be the exact opposite of what my character was, which was a Asian American young female superhero, because then you would never know that, I was really a superhero in disguise if I was this redneck Texas guy. But all of those were ways that we, I think every kid grows up playing a lot of games and doing a lot of play acting. And some of us end up actually following it as a career choice. And for me, it was really because it was where I completely let go of, I'm a very reflective person. Mm-hmm. I spend a lot of time, thinking and processing, but when I'm play acting, it's just fun, and you literally forget about everything else. And I always tell people theater is my form of meditation. And it is, because you literally go into a whole nother world when you're in the moment. And that's, I think, my first seeds of falling in love with what I would eventually do as a profession.
That's awesome. And your brother happens to be a well-known actor here in town too, David Hsieh. So that's neat that you both sort of ended up in the field and part of this community. Let's talk a little bit about what you've done at Seattle Public Theater and what you remember, and maybe if memories or moments stick out to you from any of those productions that I listed.
The first show that I think I did was Best Christmas Pageant Ever. And I remember when I got cast, and I'd actually seen several productions of it, but I never remembered names very well. And so I don't remember character names either. And so I remember when I was offered the part of Grace, I was like, oh, sure. And in my head, I kept thinking Grace was one of those side moms who have a couple of phone call scenes and that's it. So I thought, oh, good, this will be easy. I can and then when I got the script and I realized that Grace was the central character and was in every single scene and had a ton of lines, I was like, oh crap. But it was great fun. And I think what I loved about doing the Best Christmas Pageant Ever was just actually all the kids, working with all the kids. And then for anyone who's never been backstage, if SPT opens back up and you get a chance to do a backstage tour,
it's not big.
Tiny little dressing rooms. And so what I think we have 13 women and young girls sharing one dressing room, and there's 3 guys in the other one. But I love that. And some of the teens that I've met through Best Christmas Pageant Ever, I'm still in touch with pretty regularly, and love the fact that they're now graduating from high school and applying to colleges. It's it's like being a theater mom, or they actually call me the really coolest aunt. And so I love those shows. And of course, the other ones I got to do, like Amadeus, it was cast in a way where it was a lot of us women playing, and incredible women playing male characters. And so that was a lot of fun because we got to play characters we never would have otherwise. And I just loved, again, hanging out in the dressing room and just having a lot of girl talk and talking about issues and stuff. But it was really non-traditionally cast as well. Brandon Simmons got to play Salieri. Tim Gowron was Amadeus, and Keiko Green was his love interest. So that was fun. And The World of Extreme Happiness, are really contrary to the title, it's a very, very dark show. But it was an all Asian American cast, and Desmond Chang directed it, and it was just really fascinating to explore that whole world with an Asian American cast. It's set in China, so it was not any of our lived experience, but that's the great thing about theater, right? We get to actually put ourselves in the shoes of other people. And actually just last week, I finished doing a radio play by the same playwright, Francis Yachu Kauhig, and Desdemona directed that as well. And it was an all Asian American cast as well. But it was when we did it as radio theater. And so it was great to be able to explore a whole nother piece along the same lines of just really putting yourselves into a whole foreign country.
I love that. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it was really, that play was very powerful. And I remember when we read it and chose it, and was very moved by just the story itself was so powerful. And I think a new experience for our audiences at that point.
And nothing like starting a play with the very first few minutes, someone's giving birth on stage.
Yeah, and by the way, here's this kind of play.
You know what's so great about that play? You were talking about the audience having not experienced something like that. I still, well, not in the last 8 months, but prior to that, I still would run into people, your audience would run into me at different theaters around town and come up to me and still talk about how much they love the post-play discussions for that show. because it was so powerful, and it took them to a whole different place. And it was the combination of seeing the show
Mhm,
with all these people,
mhm.
and then being able to talk about and process the play with a whole community of people. And it
Right.
was that combination that really, really stood out for them. And a lot of people really commented on how much they grew from that experience.
Yeah, we learned a lot. I mean, that was one of the first times that we really leaned into that process of post-play discussions in a much deeper way, and we learned a lot from that process. And I think, as you know, we do that now with every piece that we do, and it's become a pretty important component. And I think even a more important component going forward when we are allowed. Because the conversations, I mean, that's what we are, it's in our mission, you know, to have
Yeah.
these conversations and really open up dialogue about different issues and different worlds and everything. So yeah, that's great that
And
you
especially
remember that.
especially coming out of this isolation
Yeah.
period, I think people are going to be craving that even more. It's one thing for anyone experiencing live theater and all the emotions and laughter and joy it can bring up with all these people, but it adds so much more when then you're able to talk about it and connect with it and hear what other people's ideas are. And it's through that connection of bringing community together that is live theater strength, I think.
Mhm.
And just knowing, and especially your theater, because it's based in a neighborhood and so many people that go to it are connected to the neighborhood in some way. So just getting to know your neighbors, complete strangers maybe when you first enter the space, and somehow leaving that space knowing that you had a whole experience together and being able to talk about together, I think is so valuable.
Yeah, I do too. And I think the intimacy of the space too kind of leans into that, allows it to feel not that you're so distant from people on stage, but that we're all really in the same space having a conversation in real time, and that it's
Yeah.
not a lecture in a way, you know, that sometimes I think post play discussions can start to feel like. So I think we're also blessed with our space.
Yeah, because the
Yeah.
configuration also makes you really feel like you're
We're in
all
a
in it
circle.
together.
Yeah. 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 Um, uh, let's talk about sort of your larger part of being the community, and what I know that you and I have not just worked on Chinglish both at Arts West, but at the Community Asian Theater of the Sierras in Nevada City, California, but also Hotel on the Corner of Bitter and Sweet at Book It, and so many countless others that you have been part of, and people know you from in this community. So let's just talk about maybe some of your favorites, things that really resonate with you, and you remember, or you know, how you intersect with this community. And
Yeah. And I'm not just saying this because you're interviewing me, but really, like, three of my favorite productions I've ever got to do were ones that you
oh,
directed. And I think it's because you were such a nurturer in person and in the theater, that you really create a space where I love doing theater in general. I mean, any play, and with all the different artists in town, and the out of town experiences I've had. But there's something about what you create in the productions I've worked with you on where we really feel like a family together.
mhm.
And I think I've really bonded with the people in those casts, Chinglish at Arts West, and also down in California, and then Hotel and Corner Bitter and Sweet, more than I even do in other productions. And it's because there's something about the rehearsal process with you where we not only explore the world of the play together, but I love working with you because I feel safe in just trying things. And like, I don't feel like when I come into the rehearsal space, I mean, there's a lot of great directors out there, but some of them I feel so intimidated by that it's hard to then let go of that, a little bit of that self-consciousness. Or there's others where it feels like they're going after like the look of the play. I'm like so much about the look and the aesthetics and all of that other stuff where I almost feel like sometimes I'm a human prop.
Mhm,
um,
mhm.
and there's something about the process that you create, and I can't even put my finger on it other than the feeling of feeling like we can just explore the human emotion that these characters are having and the world that it is, so that whatever choices we make, I never feel like when you give notes that it is in any way like actually the notes that you give are almost as if I'm talking with, you know, a great counselor or friend about like, what about let's do this, or you know, it's just in a way where it makes it feel like you are an extension of my psyche in some weird way, that I love. And so I think you know, I really love those experiences, and I actually thought that I like my best some of my best performances were in those shows because of that process.
Mm.
Yeah, and so those are definitely memories that stand out for me. Um, I was I just remember there was one moment in Hotel in the Corner Bittersweet, which I was like, I don't know if I should share this with the broader community. I had a birthday in the middle of that run that was uh, during tech rehearsal, and again the casts bonded so much in that rehearsal process that our whole cast, and what we had a cast of like
21, I think.
21 people. Yeah, it was huge.
Yeah.
And it was, but we really bonded. It was very multiracial. I was majority Asian American, but we also had Black cast members and white cast members. And we would spend all of our spare time together as well. Like with that show,
Yeah.
we actually sold out. This was for Book It. We actually sold out the entire run before we even opened.
Yep.
And then Book It asked us if we'd be willing to do extra shows, and they added in like I think like 6 extra shows and school matinees, and those all sold out right away as well. And we had waiting lines of people every night to try to get in, and it was phenomenal. And so despite that, we were like sometimes doing like 7, 8 shows a week, and the cast, even beyond those performances, would hang out in that time in between on our breaks. We would hang out on our off nights that we weren't rehearsing or performing. That's how close this cast was with each other. It was a pretty phenomenal family. That
I remember the potluck during tech. Do you remember that potluck?
Yes.
Everyone brought sort of
So
dishes from
food.
them, you know, from their families, and like whatever soul food was theirs, and like, oh my God, the spread was unbelievable. That food was just so good.
But not only the potlucks, every performance, everyone would bring food to share. And it was, and we had one cast member, Lawrence, he makes cocktails. So some nights he would bring in his whole cocktail setup. And like, oh no, we only drink after the show was over.
Yes.
But he would have he would make cocktails for everyone to have after the show was over. That
was one of my favorite experiences too, directing. I mean, I learned a lot. I mean, I'd never directed 21 people on stage before, and but that show, like you, was very special. It taught me a lot. And I think it gave me a direction in my work that from that moment on, I have been in a direction of the kind of work I wanted to do, and the kind of work I want audiences to see. And
and what was so great about that was not only was it multiracial in terms of the cast, but age-wise, we had a spread of people who are from like, I think it was like 12 years old to all the way to people who are in their 70s, I think early 70s. And the fact that we all bonded so well just really goes to show, again, how much theater can bring people together, and that you get to know people in ways that where age, gender, race doesn't really matter, because in our heart we're all human beings connecting and working together.
Absolutely. So powerful. Are there other things that you want to talk about? I mean, I know you are so involved in the community, not just on stage, but behind stage with the Arts and Cultural Affairs Office, and with your activism. And do you want to speak a little bit to that? Because people may not know about that part of you, that is such an integral part of our community.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's interesting because my love of theater actually came about because what I love most is just working on a project where you're working collectively with a group of people towards a similar goal. And then when you add in the audience, it's again sharing that out with an even broader community base, and creating lived experiences that we all share together. So it's those things that I fell in love with theater the most around. And that I think connects to ever since I was little. I've always been an activist at heart. I have no idea where it comes from other than I'll share in just a sec. I remember like when I was like really little, one of my first memories, I must have been like 5 or something, and the doorbell rang and it was the post person, and she was female. And I remember I was so excited because the only male people we had seen deliver our mail were always men. And to have a woman in uniform delivering our mail, I got so excited. I remember running through the house going, "Women's Lib is coming through." Like, I have no idea where I even got that phrase. And I was just running through the house, so excited to see a woman in that role at that young age, which is, it's still even rare now, I think, for a lot of professions to have as the same number of women as men, even today. But I just remember thinking that ever since I was little, I've always like stood up for stuff. And later on, of course, in high school and college, I realized it's because, my family comes from that. My dad, I didn't know this until after college in my 20s through a museum exhibit, found out that my dad was sued the city of Seattle, my employer now, sued the city of Seattle in a landmark case because when he first tried to move here, he had applied they were looking for all these civil engineers, and when they did the hiring, they hired all these people, but the people that had the most education, he was working towards his PhD at the time, the only people they did not hire were men of color. And specifically immigrant men of color. And so when he researched it, he found out the reason why I wasn't hired is because you have to take a civil service test and only United States citizens who are born here, something like that, could take it. And so when he looked into it, he realized that the city of Seattle was pretty white, employee-wise, because as government workers, it prevented that law that was in place, prevented a lot of people of color from being able to apply for those jobs. So he actually sued, and they realized it was from a law that was left over from the 1800s, this thing. And so it overturned that law. So because of that, a lot more people of color were finally eligible to work for the city of Seattle. And he has a whole history of standing up for civil liberties throughout his life here in this country. And my mom's family came from similar stock in China, doing a lot of standing up against communism, standing up against the Japanese during World War II, helping to start a new government. My grandfather was huge in Taiwan for working in education. And so I realized that my grandmother ran this whole underground newspaper in China during the war, while my grandfather was working in education. All this stuff that I discovered much, much later on. I realized that that's probably been in my genes, and why from a young age I've always like rallied. And now, of course, you and I are working with a lot of other theater arts leaders to really look at how can we make theater more equitable for people of color, for people of all genders, abilities, etc. And using this time to really look at that and make things more healthy for all people. Yeah.
It gives me real hope. It's a beacon of hope right now, and a what could be a very difficult time for a lot of us, especially in this industry. It's a very powerful time. I think it's also really making those of us who are white in this industry really take responsibility and be very thoughtful about how we are acting in this world, and what is our responsibility, and what we need to do to make sure that this doesn't continue, that we do better.
I mean, it's really bottom line, it's racial equity and being anti-racist is really about building relationships with all people, realizing that we're all human, and that these categories that humans have been placed in, around race or gender, that none of them are actually biologically finite the way that our country has defined them, that everyone is really on a spectrum of different unique ways of being. And so it's really just remembering that we're all people and human beings, and how do we want to be treated, and how do we treat other people in the way that we want to be treated,
Mhm.
and just really working at creating workspaces and theater and everything that we do in a way that as human beings we can feel that we can be seen and valued and heard for who we are as human beings in relationship with each other, and work collectively to honor that humanity in each person.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, so important. So what would you tell some of our emerging artists who are just putting their toes in or wanting to when the doors open or just got started before everything got shut down? What advice or thoughts would you want to impart given all that you've done in your career so far, and that might help them in moving forward?
Yeah, I know this is something I have a lot of young people that I mentor a lot, and every person's different, so the advice I might give each individual person might be very specific to them. But if I was to give one general piece of advice, um, it is that timely old fashioned one of, follow your passions. But one of the things I always say is that your passion doesn't have to be what you make money doing. And
Mhm.
the reason why I separate that is our country right now is still very capitalistic at its foundation. And while I personally don't feel that capitalism is the best way to go for the health of actually the majority of our country, I do say that because that is the way our country is currently structured, we do have to work within that reality. So within that reality, there's so many things that you might be passionate about, whether it's theater or carpentry or fixing things with your hands or gardening, and all those things should be things that you love and spend time doing, and learn all that you can and continue to do throughout your whole life, because those are the things that bring you joy. But they don't have to be the things that you have to depend on to make money. And I think too much in this society, we try to combine the two.
Mhm.
And that's what makes so many people so unhappy. And as quick examples of that, for instance, if you feel that, like as a theater artist, you're trying to make money from doing your theater, it is possible, but then you're going to start taking jobs that might compromise your happiness in doing theater.
Mhm.
And I found when I finally realized I could separate the two, ironically, I ended up doing more theater that actually paid, and I could actually do it almost as a living. But I actually prefer to still keep them separate, even when I was able to, like for 7 years, I actually just lived off of just doing theater. But it did make you start just taking jobs just because it was a paid theater job or acting job. And some of those jobs are like, did it make me happy? Was it really a role that I wanted to do? And by not having to worry about that, and making my money doing some other things, there's so many things I actually enjoy doing that I can make money from.
Mhm.
I actually love bookkeeping, so I did bookkeeping for a lot of that time period as well. And that way, what you make money on, you can that's your job, and you don't have to get frustrated by it because it's not something that's your lifelong passion. And then that way, you can still choose to just do things that bring you joy with your art. And I think then you don't compromise your art ever, because it becomes the thing that has to pay your paycheck. And there's a lot of artists I know who, by following that same advice, ironically, you end up starting to really start choosing jobs that you really feel passionate. Actually, I should say work that you feel passionate about, because it's not paying your paycheck. And ironically, by leaning into that, you end up actually doing so much work that feeds your soul and your heart, that you start actually getting more job offers because people are seeing you do stuff that you're thriving on, as opposed to those jobs you take just because it pays a check and it's acting, but you're not as into, and somehow I don't think your full being it doesn't bring out the best in you
Right.
as an artist when you take those jobs. So that is actually the advice that I tend to give most young people.
I love it. I love it. We're coming to our end of our time, but I wanted to just ask one last thing, because we're sort of looking towards a hopeful future of when we can all be in the room and work together. What are some of your hopes for this community when we are able to open our doors and bring in our audiences again into a live space? What's your hopes and dreams after this pandemic moves it on its merry way?
um, this one is the hard question because, you know, my day job working for the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture is actually part of my job right now, besides managing our grants programs and helping people navigate this time period, is actually working on a lot of the citywide task force, as well as different community-based task force in how do we reopen in a way that is safe. And when we talk about safe, it is in ways that are healthy, not only because of the public health crisis because of COVID, but also because of the public health crisis of racism that COVID has daylighted, that has always existed in our country for hundreds of years. And so there's a lot of this. I'll be really transparent. I'm a pretty hard on your sleeve kind of person, and during this roller coaster ride of this year, have gone through some really down moments of going, is it even, I mean, can we actually find a place that's even feasible in our capitalistic society? But then so much has inspired me. Seeing how many artists and arts and cultural organizations have continued to create art and ways of bringing people together, even if it's on a virtual plane and not in person, has been so inspiring, because none of us are making money right now doing that.
Right.
But we have continued to do that because we know how vital it is, not only for our own mental and spiritual and emotional well-being, but it's been so vital for community. And we know the value that art has in community right now. And so one of the things that I hope for coming out of this is that so many people realize how much before COVID, that especially in Seattle, where we have so much art and so many arts and cultural organizations, where in some ways the broader community and even our own artists took our art for granted. That, oh, we have so much, it's always here. We can always, like, literally in Seattle, there's a lot of places. I travel all over the world. There's a lot of places where there's not very much art. There's not much that you can choose from. Here, we have that so much so that any night you could literally open the newspaper and like go, oh, what do we want to do? And you have so many choices. But I think with this time period, I'm really hoping that coming back, people will realize how much we take that for granted, and that there's going to be, unfortunately, maybe a lot of art that won't be able to come back as quickly. So that's one thing. During this time period where everything's been online, I think a lot of people are realizing how many people with different disabilities are finally having access to our art, because on online platforms, which a lot of people with different disabilities have asked for, like, online is a way that they've been able to actually engage with stuff before COVID. And now during COVID, now that we're doing much more online, more people with disabilities have actually been able to engage with the art that we've been creating online. And so I'm hoping that after COVID is over, even when we're able to open our spaces, more people with disabilities and more arts and cultural organizations will continue to offer both and in-person and online programming, so that we can continue that access depending on wherever people, you know, are at in their life. So those are two huge hopes that I have. And also the work you and I've been doing with this consortium of arts leaders, and all the different ways we're talking about how can we do this in more healthy ways? How can we take more time in creating art, and how can we make it healthier for all artists, but especially those artists who, like artists of color, those with disabilities who have not had as much access before. If we center that, then it will actually be better for everybody. And I'm really hoping that what comes out of this is a much more whole and healthy and humanistic society in general, by centering where we've not been doing that as much before. And with the Black Lives Matter movement, I really honestly hope, because it does feel like, to me at least, and a lot of Black activists have also said that they've never seen this in their lifetime, even those who lived through 1968, the protests then, that more people will understand that the inequity around Black lives and Indigenous lives in our country cannot continue, and that we really, really have to work together as a collective community to ensure that violence and the inequitable systems of the school to prison pipeline, our health, climate change, food justice, all of that is very interconnected. Our economic class system that no one ever talks about in this country, but so definitely exists, that we are all much more aware of how these things create so much inequity, specifically for certain groups of people more so than others, that we will all work more closely together to change those systems so that it's better for Black, Indigenous people, and therefore then will become much more whole and healthy for all of us by extension.
That's a great place to end it. That is my hope too. Yes. Kathy, thank you so much for joining us today and
Thank you, Annie.
chatting with me and sharing it with our patrons. And I know I will see you soon on yet another Zoom. And hopefully even sooner on our stages once we
Yes. And thanks to all your audience for supporting you through this time. Again, all theaters, all arts organizations need our support in whatever way we can lend the support, even if it's just by showing up online. But yes, thank you.
Huge. All right. Take care.
Bye, Annie.